In my language, there's a word for sacred debt, aini. It means balance. Life for life. My grandfather taught me this word when I was 7 years old, sitting on the bank of the Ucayali River, watching the brown water carry everything downstream. But a jaguar taught me what it actually means when I was 68. Diego Vargas doesn't look like a man who spent 30 years killing jaguars. He's compact and quiet, with the kind of stillness that comes from decades in the forest. His hands are scarred from machete work and thorn tears, but they move gently when he talks, tracing patterns in the air like he's mapping invisible trails. When he speaks about Phantasma, the ghost, those hands shake. The jaguar earned his name honestly. For 20 years he evaded every hunter in the Peruvian Amazon's Ucayali region. Locals claimed he could disappear into shadow even at noon. Diego tracked him for 3 of those years when hunting was still his trade. He never got close enough for a clean shot. The only definitive identification came from trail camera footage that captured the jaguar's left shoulder. A rosette pattern that looked like a broken star, the dark border fragmented into asymmetrical pieces with 2 dots inside instead of the typical single spot. Diego killed 17 jaguars before Phantasma. He recites the number without hesitation, the way you state your address or age, facts you can't change. He started hunting at 19 because jaguars took his uncle's cattle and the government paid bounties. By 30, he was one of the best trackers in Ucayali. By 40, the jaguar population had collapsed so thoroughly that the government stopped the bounty program and started prosecuting hunters instead. That's when Diego became a guide. I didn't have a spiritual awakening, he told me when we first met. His voice carrying the flat honesty of someone who's done lying to himself. I needed work. The jaguars were almost gone. I knew their territory better than anyone, so I started showing tourists where they used to be. But something changed in those years of watching tourists photograph empty forests. Diego started noticing the absence. The way the capybara herds grew too large without predator pressure. The way the peccaries lost their wariness. The forest felt unbalanced, he said, like a sentence with the wrong word removed, so the whole meaning shifted into something uncomfortable. He was 68 when he planned his final expedition before retirement. One last trek into the deep forest near the Ucayali tributary where he'd spent most of his hunting years. His daughter in Lima thought he was being sentimental. His friends at the guide cooperative thought he was chasing ghosts. Diego said he just wanted to see if Phantasma was still alive, not to hunt, to know, to have proof that something survived him. He found fresh tracks on the 3rd day, massive paw prints pressed into mud near a mineral lick, each one larger than Diego's palm. The gait pattern showed a slight favor of the right front leg, compensating for old injury or arthritis. Diego crouched beside those prints for 10 minutes, reading the story pressed into earth. Male, full-grown, at least 200 pounds, moving with purpose, not hunting. His chest went tight looking at those tracks. 40 years of hunting jaguars and guiding tourists to see them, and he still felt that primal response, the knowledge that something more powerful than you shares your exact location. Your body knows before your brain catches up. His heart rate jumped, his peripheral vision sharpened, every sound became magnified. He whispered, "I'm sorry," to the tracks, not to the forest, not to conservation or ecology or any abstract concept, to the animal itself, to Phantasma specifically, as if the jaguar could hear him across the kilometers of dense vegetation, as if an apology could carry weight after 17 deaths and 3 decades. Diego followed the tracks upstream, moving with the careful silence of someone who's spent a lifetime not being heard. The forest canopy closed overhead, filtering the light into that particular green dimness that makes distances impossible to judge. Morpho butterflies flickered blue against shadows. A troop of howler monkeys announced his presence from the safety of high branches. The Ucayali tributary ran steady to his left, brown water moving south with the patient certainty of something that's carved its path through stone. 3 hours later, he found something that made his legs go numb. What he discovered would make that apology meaningless and then make it everything. The wire snare was Brazilian design, triple-strand steel cable anchored to a rubber tree trunk with a spring mechanism that tightened under struggling weight. Illegal throughout Peru for the past 8 years, but poachers still crossed the border to set them in remote territories where enforcement was sparse. Diego recognized the construction immediately. He'd used similar traps himself in the early days before he learned jaguars were worth more alive to tourists than dead for pelts. Phantasma lay on his side in the leaf litter, caught. The wire had closed around the jaguar's right rear leg, cutting through fur and skin down to muscle. Blood had dried in dark streaks along the limb. The animal's breathing came in shallow pants, flanks rising and falling with visible effort. Diego estimated the jaguar had been trapped for at least 2 days, maybe longer, without access to water. Dehydration showed in the sunken quality around the eyes, the slight foam at the corners of the mouth. The broken star rosette marked the left shoulder unmistakably. This was him. 20 years evading hunters and a poacher's wire had accomplished what no rifle could. Diego's first instinct was pure hunter reflex: run. Every cell in his body screamed the same message. Wounded predators are the most dangerous. A trapped jaguar with nothing left to lose will use everything it has left. Jaws that can crush turtle shells and caiman skulls, claws that can disembowel a peccary in one swipe, 200 pounds of dying muscle and fury with nowhere to go but through you. But Diego didn't run. He stood at the clearing's edge, 20 feet from the jaguar, and watched. Phantasma's head was up, amber eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made Diego's throat go dry. Not the flat predator stare he'd seen dozens of times through rifle sights. Something different. The jaguar's ears were forward, not flattened. Its tail lay still against the ground, not lashing. No growl, no warning grunt, no aggressive vocalization at all. The jaguar was watching him the way Diego watched the forest, assessing, calculating, trying to understand what comes next. He was asking, Diego told me, his voice dropping to barely audible. I know how that sounds. I know what biologists would say. But I looked in his eyes and he was asking if I was going to kill him or leave him to die slowly. Diego's hands shook so badly he had to sit down. Just dropped into a crouch right there at the clearing's edge, wire cutters hanging from his belt, 40 years of jaguar hunting colliding with the present moment. He killed 17 of this animal's kind, tracked them, trapped them, skinned them, sold their pelts to buyers who shipped them to Asia and Europe. He built a life on jaguar death. Now one was dying in front of him, and every instinct said this was justice. This was Aini, balance, life for life. Except the balance was wrong. 17 jaguars dead against one man's guilt didn't equal anything. It just made a bigger hole in the world. Diego stood up, started walking toward the trapped jaguar. Phantasma's breathing changed, not faster with fear, but slower, more controlled. The kind of breathing pattern Diego had seen in wounded animals conserving energy for a final fight, or something else, something that looked almost like conscious decision. The jaguar's eyes never left Diego, not tracking prey, not measuring threat, just watching, waiting. Diego knelt 6 feet from the jaguar's head, close enough to see the individual whiskers, close enough to smell the musk and blood and fear scent, close enough to die in less than 2 seconds. if the animal decided this human was the enemy. He pulled out the wire cutters. "I'm going to help you," Diego said in Quechua, the language of his grandfather, the same language that gave him the word Aini. "Don't kill me for it." The jaguar's tail twitched once, then went still. Diego crawled forward on his knees. He made a choice then that still wakes him up at night. He chose to believe a wild predator understood human intention. He chose to trust that mercy could be recognized across species boundaries. He chose to bet his life that guilt and redemption meant something to more than just humans. Phantasma watched him come and didn't move. 30 minutes to cut through triple-strand steel cable with hand tools, inches from teeth that could crush his skull. Diego positioned himself at the jaguar's rear leg, working the wire cutters against metal that had been designed to hold animals 10 times stronger than him. His hands cramped, sweat dripped into his eyes. The forest sounds faded into background static, his entire world compressed to wire and blood, and the weight of the jaguar's attention on his back. Phantasma never moved. Diego talked the entire time, soft words in Quechua, the same phrases he used to calm his hunting dogs before a trek. "Easy now, almost through. I know it hurts. Stay still." The absurdity wasn't lost on him, comforting a predator that probably couldn't understand a single word, whose species he'd nearly eliminated from this territory. But the talking kept his hands steady, kept his breathing even, kept the panic at bay. The jaguar's eyes tracked every movement. Diego could feel that gaze like physical pressure between his shoulder blades. He'd been watched by jaguars before, through rifle scopes and from tree stands. This was different. There was assessment in it, patience, the kind of focused attention that required energy the animal couldn't afford to waste. Phantasma was choosing to watch rather than fight, choosing to stay still rather than thrash. The wire finally parted with a metallic snap that echoed too loud in the clearing. Diego fell backward, wire cutters dropping from nerveless fingers. The jaguar's leg was free, badly wounded, infection already visible in the swollen tissue around the cut, but free. Phantasma stood slowly, testing the wounded leg. The movement was careful, controlled, each muscle engaging separately like the jaguar was conducting an internal inventory of damage. He kept weight off the injured limb, but didn't collapse, didn't fall. The wire hung from the rubber tree trunk behind him, still swaying slightly, a piece of evidence that would rust into nothing within months. Then the jaguar turned to face Diego. 6 feet separated them, maybe less, close enough that Diego could see the gold striations in those amber eyes, close enough to count the whiskers, close enough to smell the musk and copper scent of big cat and blood. The jaguar's tail held in neutral curve, not aggressive, not fearful, just present. His ears stayed forward. Every element of body language Diego had learned to read over 40 years indicated something he didn't have vocabulary for. Not threat assessment, not prey calculation, something closer to recognition. They stayed that way for 15 seconds. Diego counted them later, replaying the moment in his mind until it became more real than reality. 15 seconds of eye contact with a wild jaguar he'd just freed from a death trap. 15 seconds of wordless communication across the species boundary that humans pretend is absolute. Behavioral biologists will tell you, jaguars don't understand human intention. They react to threat or opportunity, nothing more. They're solitary apex predators driven by instinct and learned behavior, not abstract concepts like gratitude or debt. Their cognitive architecture doesn't support theory of mind, the understanding that other beings have intentions, motivations, internal states that matter. Diego described something different. He said the animal was thinking. He knew, Diego told me, and his voice broke on the word. He knew I was the same species that set the trap. Same hands, same smell, same threat. But not the same man. He understood the difference. I saw it in his eyes. He was deciding if I deserved to live. The Jaguar's gaze felt like judgment and absolution compressed into the same moment. Diego's chest went tight. His eyes burned. He hadn't cried since his wife died 6 years earlier. Not at the funeral, not during the long nights after, not once. But kneeling in that clearing with a freed jaguar staring into him, something broke. Or maybe healed. He still doesn't know which. The tears came hot and fast, silent. Diego didn't move, didn't wipe them away, didn't break eye contact. If this was the moment Phantasma decided humans weren't worth sparing, Diego thought he'd earned it. 17 lives, 1 throat. The math almost worked. Phantasma turned and disappeared into the understory without a sound. One moment present, the next gone, like he'd been constructed from shadow and simply dissolved back into his component parts. The ghost lived up to his name. Diego pulled out his GPS unit with shaking hands and marked the coordinates. Saved them under one word, Aini. He had no idea why, no rational reason to preserve the location of something that would never happen again. 2 weeks later, he understood. Diego returned to camp and told no one. The other guides would think he was fabricating stories for tourists. The conservation officials would want to investigate, maybe track the wounded jaguar, possibly capture it for medical treatment, which would mean tranquilizers and trauma, and the animal associating human contact with imprisonment rather than rescue. Diego couldn't allow that. So he stayed quiet, marked the encounter in his personal field journal, and continued his work as if nothing had shifted. But everything had shifted. He guided small groups through the jungle for the next 2 weeks, pointing out poison dart frogs and 3-toed sloths, and the medicinal plants his grandfather taught him to identify. He smiled for photographs. He answered questions about jaguar territory and hunting patterns. At night, he lay in his hammock and replayed those 15 seconds of eye contact until they wore grooves in his memory, deeper than the old hunting routes he could still walk blindfolded. His daughter called on the satellite phone to say Mateo was coming. Diego's grandson, 12 years old, living in Lima with his mother, visiting the Amazon for the first time. Diego's chest went tight with something between joy and terror. The deep forest wasn't safe for children unfamiliar with its rules. But Mateo had been asking for years, and these were Diego's last weeks before retirement. Maybe his last chance to pass something meaningful to the next generation. Mateo arrived on a supply boat, all skinny limbs and nervous energy, eyes wide at the green density surrounding the camp. Diego watched his grandson take in the forest with the particular wonder of someone encountering wilderness for the first time, not the packaged, safe wilderness of documentaries, but the real thing, the version with venomous snakes and biting insects and sounds that make your hair stand up. They spent the first 3 days close to camp. Diego taught Mateo to read animal tracks in mud, to identify bird calls, to move through undergrowth without leaving obvious trails. The boy learned quickly, soaked up information like he'd been starving for it. Every question led to 3 more. Why do jaguars prefer river territories? How do you tell fresh scat from old? What do the different morpho-butterfly species mean about forest health? On the 4th evening, sitting by the fire, while the other guides played cards, Mateo asked the question Diego had been dreading. "Did you really kill jaguars, abuelo?" Diego looked at his grandson in the firelight, 12 years old, still believing his grandfather was a hero. He could lie, could soften the truth into something more palatable, could say he only killed problem animals, only when necessary, only to protect people. Instead, he said, "Yes, 17. The number hung in the smoke between them. Why? Because I thought they were just animals. I was wrong. Mateo was quiet for a long time, processing. Then, when did you know you were wrong? Diego wanted to say something profound, wanted to explain the slow accumulation of guilt, the recognition of absence, the way the forest felt empty without apex predators balancing the ecosystem. Instead, he found himself telling the truth. 2 weeks ago, one taught me. He didn't elaborate, Mateo didn't push. Some stories need time before they're ready to be told. Diego thought that conversation would be the most important lesson of the trip. Honesty, accountability, the weight of choices made before you understand their full cost. He was wrong. The next morning, Diego spotted fresh tracks near the camp perimeter, massive paw prints pressed into soft earth near the water source. Same size as Phantasma, same gait pattern favoring the right front leg. The wounded Jaguar was nearby, moving through territory uncomfortably close to human presence, instead of retreating deeper into the forest to heal safely. Diego's skin prickled. Jaguars avoid humans when possible. They're solitary, territorial, protective of their ranges, but not suicidal about defending them. An injured jaguar should be hiding, conserving energy, staying away from anything that might pose additional threat. Yet these tracks circled the camp. Once, twice, 3 times over the past 2 nights based on the weathering patterns. Phantasma was watching them. Diego felt something then that he couldn't name, not fear, not quite recognition, something closer to anticipation. Like the forest was holding its breath, like the next chapter of a story was about to begin and he'd already signed his name to pages he hadn't read yet. The feeling followed him all day, sat heavy in his chest, made him check on Mateo more often than necessary. That night, Diego barely slept. He kept thinking about Aini, balance, life for life, debt and payment. The next morning, Mateo disappeared. Dawn came grey and heavy with moisture, the kind of morning where the forest feels closer than usual, pressing in. Diego woke to his internal clock, 5:30, same as every day for 40 years. He checked Mateo's hammock out of habit, expecting to see his grandson's sleeping form cocooned in mosquito netting. Empty. The panic was immediate and total. Diego's hands went cold, his vision tunneled. He called Mateo's name once, twice, voice cracking on the second syllable. Nothing. The other guides stumbled from their shelters, groggy and confused. Within 3 minutes, they'd organized a search pattern. Within 5, Diego found Mateo's tracks leading away from camp toward the river. The boy's footprints were clear in the damp earth, sneakers with distinctive tread, child-sized, moving with purpose rather than fear. Diego reconstructed the timeline from the sign. Mateo left maybe an hour ago, just after first light. Following something, Diego spotted what had drawn him, a small branch broken at child height, sap still fresh, with the distinctive iridescent blue wing scale of a morpho butterfly stuck to the break. Diego had mentioned them the night before, said they were indicators of healthy forest, said spotting a metallic blue morpho was good luck. Now his grandson was following one, deeper into territory Diego hadn't cleared for safety. The tracks led straight toward the Ucayali tributary. Diego's chest constricted. The tributary section here was dangerous. Rapids formed where the river narrowed between rock formations, creating currents strong enough to pull grown men under. 3 drownings documented in the past 5 years, all experienced swimmers. A 12-year-old boy from Lima who'd never seen water move faster than a swimming pool wouldn't stand a chance. The search team spread out. Diego moved ahead, reading sign, following his grandson's path with the same tracking skills he'd once used to hunt jaguars. Every broken twig, every disturbed leaf, every partial footprint in soft earth. The trail was easy, too easy. Mateo wasn't trying to hide. He thought he was safe, thought the forest was just a larger version of the carefully managed parks in Lima, where danger came with warning signs and boundaries. Diego reached the tributary after 40 minutes of near running. His lungs burned. His legs felt like water. Fear had metabolized into something chemical and sharp in his bloodstream, making everything too bright, too loud, too present. Mateo's backpack lay on the rocks near the water's edge. Diego's heart stopped. Actually stopped for a beat, maybe two, before slamming back into rhythm hard enough to hurt. He scrambled down the muddy bank, nearly falling, catching himself on exposed roots. The backpack was open, Mateo's water bottle inside, his notebook, the disposable camera Diego had given him to document wildlife. Footscuffs in the mud showed where Mateo had slipped, drag marks toward the water. Then nothing. Diego screamed his grandson's name. The sound echoed off the rock formations and died in the forest canopy. He waded into the tributary, feeling the current pull at his legs even in the shallows. The water was brown with sediment, impossible to see through. He moved downstream, searching the eddies, the pools behind rocks, anywhere a small body might catch. Nothing. The other guides arrived. They organized a systematic sweep, one team upstream, one down, one searching the banks for any sign. Diego continued downstream, calling Mateo's name until his voice went raw, until the words became just sound without meaning. The rapids roared constant in the background, drowning everything else. 40 minutes of searching, then 50, then an hour. The current should have carried a body to the shallow bend 200 meters downstream. Diego reached it, searched the entire area. The water was only knee-deep here, clear enough to see the rocky bottom. Nothing, no body, no clothing, no evidence that his grandson had ever existed, except for the backpack on the rocks and the slip marks in the mud. Diego told me later that his legs went numb, not from the cold water. From the certainty that Mateo was gone, that the jungle he loved had taken the only family he had left, that his last gift to his grandson would be teaching him enough about the forest to wander into it alone and die there. His heart stopped working right. He said it actually stopped beating for a proper rhythm, just fluttered in his chest like a trapped bird. Then he heard something. Not a human sound, something deeper, something that made every hair on his body stand up. A jaguar's vocalization, territorial marking call, repetitive, insistent, coming from upstream, coming from the direction of the snare site. The call pattern was specific, a series of low, rhythmic grunts that jaguars use to announce territorial presence, repeated in sets of 3 with pauses between. Diego had heard the sound hundreds of times during his hunting years. Jaguars vocalized like this near kills, near den sites, near boundaries they were defending. But this was different. The repetition was too regular, too insistent, almost like the animal was trying to attract attention rather than warn others away. Diego ran. He left the other guides at the downstream search area, didn't explain, just crashed through the undergrowth back upstream toward the source of the vocalization. Branches whipped his face. Vines caught his legs. He fell twice, pulled himself up without feeling the impact, driven by something beyond rational thought. The jaguar's call continued. 3 grunts, pause, 3 grunts, pause. A pattern that pulled him forward like a rope attached to his chest. His mind was cataloguing impossible scenarios. Jaguars don't rescue humans. They're solitary ambush predators that avoid contact with people when possible. They don't understand human distress calls. They don't perform interspecies aid. Every piece of knowledge from 40 years tracking big cats said this was meaningless. Coincidence? A territorial male happened to be vocalizing near his established range, and Diego's desperate brain was assigning meaning where none existed. But he ran anyway. The forest opened into a small clearing Diego recognized immediately, less than 50 meters from where he'd cut Phantasma free 2 weeks ago. The GPS coordinates were burned into his memory. He'd checked them a dozen times since that day, running his fingers over the saved waypoint like a talisman. Mateo lay on the ground, motionless. Standing over him, body positioned in a protective stance Diego had only ever seen in photographs of mother jaguars guarding cubs, was Phantasma. The broken star rosette, unmistakable even in the filtered morning light. The jaguar's right rear leg showed healing wound tissue where the wire had cut, pink scar, visible through parted fur. Diego's brain refused the information, rejected it completely. His vision greyed at the edges, his knees unlocked. He would have fallen if his hand hadn't caught a sapling trunk. The jaguar's posture was everything wrong according to predator behavior. He should have been crouched over prey, should have been feeding or dragging the body to cover. Instead, he stood beside Mateo, not on him, beside him, one massive paw resting near the boy's shoulder but not touching it. The exact position mother jaguars use when cubs are resting. Protective, vigilant, present. Mateo's chest rose and fell, breathing, alive. Phantasma's head turned toward Diego. The same amber eyes from 2 weeks ago, the same focused attention. Recognition passed between them. Diego was certain of it, would stake his life on it, would accept any accusation of anthropomorphization because he was there and he saw it. The jaguar knew him. Then Phantasma did something that exists outside every scientific framework for jaguar behavior. He stepped back. Deliberately, carefully, clearing space between himself and Mateo, creating room for Diego to approach. His body language shifted from protective guard to something closer to presentation, like he was transferring responsibility, like he was saying, "Here, this is yours now. I've kept him safe." Diego's throat closed. He couldn't breathe properly, couldn't process what he was witnessing. His hands shook so violently he had to clench them into fists. Every cell in his body screamed contradiction. This doesn't happen. Predators don't rescue prey species. Jaguars don't understand familial relationships across evolutionary boundaries. This is impossible. This is impossible. This is impossible. But there was his grandson, breathing, alive. And there was the jaguar he freed, waiting. Diego's knees hit the ground. Not a conscious choice. His legs simply stopped supporting weight. He knelt in the leaf litter like a penitent, like someone receiving communion, like someone witnessing the divine in a form that shouldn't exist. Tears came without permission, hot and fast, blurring his vision. His chest heaved with sobs he couldn't control. The jaguar watched him break. How did Phantasma find Mateo in the rapids that would challenge grown men? How did he pull a 12-year-old boy from current strong enough to kill? How did he carry that weight through dense forest to this specific location? The exact coordinates where Diego showed mercy 2 weeks ago? The questions were impossible. The scene in front of him was impossible, but Diego was kneeling in it, living it, choking on the weight of it. What happened next made him understand the word Aini in a way his grandfather never could have explained. In a way no human language could fully capture. Balance, life for life, debt and payment, written in a grammar older than words. Diego crawled toward Mateo on his hands and knees, not trusting his legs to hold him upright. The jaguar remained motionless, watching every movement with that same focused intensity. No aggression in the posture. No warning vocalizations. Just presence. Diego closed the distance between himself and his grandson, 10 feet, then 5, then close enough to touch. Mateo's skin was cold, lips tinged blue, breathing shallow but steady. Diego's hands shook as he checked vital signs, pulse present, airways clear, no obvious broken bones. The boy was soaked through, clothing heavy with river water, bruising already visible along his left arm and shoulder, but alive, unconscious, but alive, water in his lungs. Diego could hear the slight rattle in Mateo's breathing. The boy had gone under, had inhaled tributary water, should be dead, or dying from drowning, from hypothermia, from being swept against rocks by currents that killed experienced swimmers. Instead, he was lying in a clearing with a jaguar standing guard. The other guides crashed through the undergrowth behind Diego, their voices sharp with urgency. They stopped at the clearing's edge. Diego heard their simultaneous intake of breath, the sound people make when their brain receives information it can't immediately categorize. One of them whispered Dios mío like a prayer. Phantasma watched the humans gather, made no aggressive moves, no territorial displays, no warning grunts or snarls. He simply observed, tracking each new arrival with those amber eyes, calculating but not threatened. Diego realized the jaguar was allowing this, permitting multiple humans into his space because the situation required it, because Mateo needed more help than one animal could provide. The understanding hit Diego like physical impact. The jaguar was thinking multiple steps ahead, found the boy in the water, pulled him out, brought him to the rescue site, called for help, and now waited for humans to do what humans do, provide the medical care a jaguar couldn't offer. Diego looked at the GPS coordinates on his unit. They were less than 50 meters from where he'd cut Phantasma free. The jaguar hadn't just rescued Mateo. He'd brought the boy to the exact location where Diego saved his life. The precision was deliberate, intentional. This wasn't random wandering or coincidence. This was calculated reciprocity. Aini, life for life, balance restored. As Diego lifted Mateo, his grandson, so light in his arms, so fragile, so impossibly alive, the jaguar began backing away. No sudden movements, no panic, just slow, deliberate steps toward the clearing's edge. His eyes remained on Diego. At the tree line, Phantasma paused. What Diego described next breaks him every time he tells it. The jaguar sat, just lowered his haunches to the ground and sat like a domestic cat, tail curled around front paws, and watched. For 30 seconds, maybe longer. Time had stopped meaning anything coherent. The jaguar watched Diego hold his grandson, watched the other humans gather around. Waited until he seemed satisfied that the transfer was complete. Then he disappeared into the jungle without a sound. One moment present, the next gone, dissolving into shadow and green like he'd never been solid to begin with. Diego told me he understood in that moment. The jaguar remembered, knew who freed him, found Diego's grandson in water that should have been a death sentence, maybe heard the splash, maybe scented human distress on the wind, maybe tracked Diego's panic through chemical signals humans can't consciously read. He pulled Mateo out, brought him to the exact coordinates where Diego showed mercy. Called for help until Diego arrived, then transferred guardianship and left. The jaguar understood balance better than any human Diego had known in 68 years. I've interviewed 3 animal behaviorists about this story. None can explain it within known jaguar cognitive abilities. Problem-solving, yes, jaguars demonstrate sophisticated hunting strategies. Memory of locations, yes, they maintain extensive territorial maps. Recognition of individual humans, possibly. There's limited research suggesting big cats can distinguish between people. But intentional rescue and calculated reciprocity, that requires theory of mind, understanding that other beings have intentions, motivations, debts that matter. We barely acknowledge this capacity in great apes. Yet Diego put his hand on the ground where the jaguar sat. He said it was still warm. He said he felt the weight of what just happened try to crush him. A predator he'd hunted for decades, whose species he'd nearly eliminated from this territory, understood honor better than he had for most of his life. How do you live with that knowledge? How do you reconcile consciousness you're not supposed to believe exists? Matteo woke up in the medical tent 3 hours later. What he remembered changed everything. Diego thought he understood about the boundary between human and animal intelligence. Matteo regained consciousness slowly, in stages, first just eye movement beneath closed lids, then a soft groan, then the confused blinking of someone returning from somewhere far away. Diego sat beside his grandson's cot, hand wrapped around the boy's cold fingers, watching color gradually return to skin that had been grey-blue an hour ago. The camp medic had treated for hypothermia and near drowning, warm blankets, oxygen, careful monitoring. But Matteo's survival wasn't medical miracle. It was something else entirely. "Abuelo!" Matteo's voice came out rough, throat raw from coughing up river water. Diego couldn't speak, just nodded, squeezed his grandson's hand tighter, felt tears he thought he'd exhausted somehow, still finding their way down his face. "What happened?" Matteo tried to sit up. Diego gently pressed him back down. "You tell me first. What do you remember?" Matteo's face scrunched with effort, chasing memories that felt slippery and surreal. "The butterfly? The blue one? I wanted to photograph it for you. It kept moving toward the river. I followed." His eyes widened. "I slipped. The rocks were wet. I fell into the water." Diego's chest tightened. "Then what?" "The current pulled me under. I tried to swim, but everything was spinning. Water in my mouth, my nose. I couldn't breathe. I thought—" Matteo's voice cracked. "I thought I was going to die, abuelo." "But you didn't." Diego's hands shook. "Something pulled you out." Matteo's eyes went distant, accessing memory that didn't fit with waking logic. "I thought it was you. I felt something grab my shirt. Pull me up. Drag me out of the water. I was coughing. Everything hurt. I tried to open my eyes." Diego leaned closer. "What did you see?" "The cat." Matteo's voice dropped to whisper. "The big cat. The Jaguar." The tent went silent, except for the ambient forest noise outside, insects and birds, and the ever-present sound of the river that had nearly taken Matteo's life. "It was holding my shirt in its mouth," Matteo continued, words tumbling faster now. Like how Mama Cat carries kittens. I saw it on a documentary once. But this wasn't a documentary, this was real. I could feel its breath, hot, smelling like meat and fur. I could hear it breathing, this deep sound from its chest." Diego's throat closed. He couldn't interrupt, couldn't risk stopping the flow of testimony that confirmed what he'd witnessed. "I tried to scream, but my mouth was full of water. It dragged me onto the rocks. Then it picked me up again, carried me. I could feel it walking, the way its body moved, up and down. Its jaw was so strong, but it wasn't biting through my shirt. Just holding it, being careful." Matteo's eyes were wide now, pupils dilated with the memory. The medic stood at the tent's edge, listening. One of the other guides had moved closer. They were witnessing something being documented in real time. A 12-year-old boy describing jaguar rescue behavior that shouldn't exist in nature. "How long did it carry you?" Diego asked. "I don't know. Minutes? It felt like forever. It would stop sometimes when I coughed. Wait until I stopped choking. Then keep walking, like it knew I needed to get the water out." Matteo's voice trembled. "I thought I was dead. I thought this was what dying feels like, being carried by a predator." "But you weren't prey," Diego said softly. "No." Matteo shook his head. "I passed out again, but I remember one more thing before everything went black. It put me down, not dropped, put me down, gentle, on leaves, and then it made a sound. What kind of sound? Diego's heart hammered against his ribs. Like a grunt, but repeating, over and over, the same pattern. Matteo tried to imitate it, a rough vocalization from a 12-year-old throat that approximated the territorial call Diego had followed through the forest. It was calling for help, Diego whispered. It was calling for me. The tent was silent. Everyone present understood they were hearing something that would change how they thought about animal consciousness. Not because it fit neatly into existing frameworks, because it shattered them completely. The medic cleared his throat. I need to document the physical evidence. He showed them Matteo's shirt, the one he'd been wearing when he fell in the river. 4 puncture marks in the fabric at the back shoulder, perfectly spaced, large enough to be from significant canines. The pattern indicating controlled bite force, enough pressure to grip sodden fabric and 50 kilograms of buoy, not enough to tear through or injure the skin beneath. This is consistent with how mother jaguars carry cubs, the medic said, his voice clinical but shaking slightly. The bite placement, the pressure control. This animal was being deliberate, careful. Diego stared at those puncture marks like they were scripture. Physical evidence that what he witnessed wasn't hallucination or wishful thinking or old man's fantasy. A jaguar had rescued his grandson from drowning, had carried him through dense forest to the exact coordinates where Diego freed that same jaguar from a death trap, had called for help until Diego arrived, had transferred guardianship and departed. The implications were staggering. Multi-step problem-solving, long-term memory across weeks, individual recognition across species, understanding of human familial bonds, calculated reciprocity, empathy. Each element alone stretched known big cat cognitive abilities. Together, they suggested consciousness operating at levels science barely acknowledged in non-human animals. If you're feeling what I felt when Diego told me this, that impossible mix of awe and disbelief, then you understand why these stories matter. Subscribe to the channel. These moments need to be recorded before we forget that we share this world with minds we barely comprehend. Diego went back to that clearing every day for the rest of his trip. The jaguar never appeared again, but he found tracks, always the same pattern, approaching the clearing, circling the perimeter, leaving, like Phantasma was checking, making sure, completing the contract written in a language older than human speech. Diego didn't retire. 6 months after the rescue, he's still working as a guide in the Peruvian Amazon, still walking the same territories he once hunted, but something fundamental has shifted. He walks slower now, talks less, watches more, like he's trying to see what he missed for 68 years, the consciousness moving through the trees around him, wearing fur instead of skin. He's become obsessed with documenting Phantasma. Not for proof, for understanding. He's placed 3 remote cameras near the clearing where the jaguar brought Matteo. The photos show the same behavior, repeating, Phantasma returning to those coordinates regularly, sometimes weekly, sometimes daily, circling the space, sitting in the exact spot where he waited for Diego to arrive, then leaving. Like the location has become sacred, like he understands what happened there carries weight that requires acknowledgement. Diego took Matteo back to the clearing 1 year after the rescue. They sat quietly for hours in the filtered green light, not talking, just breathing the same air where impossible things had occurred. Near sunset, Phantasma appeared at the tree line. Didn't approach, just sat, watching them, amber eyes reflecting the failing light. The broken star rosette, unmistakable, even in shadow. 10 minutes passed, maybe longer. The jaguar remained visible, A deliberate choice for an animal called Ghost, an animal that spent 20 years being invisible to hunters. Then Phantasma stood and walked away, not rushed, not cautious, just departed, dissolving into the forest like smoke dispersing. "He was checking on me, abuelo," Mateo said after the Jaguar disappeared. His voice carried absolute certainty. "I know it sounds crazy, but he wanted to see if I was okay." Diego didn't argue. Couldn't, because he felt it too. "I met Diego 4 months ago." I'd heard rumors about the rescue story through conservation networks, whispered accounts too strange to be filed in official reports, too detailed to be completely dismissed. I tracked him down through the Ucayali Guide cooperative. He's 70 now, still strong, still sharp, but his hands shake when he talks about Phantasma. He took me to the clearing. We sat for hours. The Jaguar didn't appear, but Diego pointed to fresh tracks near the tree line. "He still comes," Diego said. "The contract doesn't end." Diego showed me his left forearm, 4 parallel scars from a jaguar attack decades ago from his hunting days. He traced them with his finger. "I wore these as proof I was tougher than the jungle. Now I understand they were warnings. I just wasn't listening." I asked what he thinks Phantasma understands about what happened. Diego was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice broke. "More than me. I freed him from a trap because I felt guilty. Because 17 dead jaguars sat heavy on my conscience. That's human thinking. Regret, redemption, trying to balance scales we invented. He saved Mateo because life demands balance. That's something older, something we lost when we decided consciousness was uniquely human. We think we're more aware than animals because we build cities and write books, but consciousness isn't technology and language. It's knowing your place in the order of things, knowing what you owe. That jaguar knows. I'm still learning," Diego cried when he said this. Not soft tears, real sobbing that shook his shoulders. He apologized, said, "It happens every time he talks about Phantasma." "I can't believe it happened," he said, wiping his face. "I was there. Mateo was there. We have the evidence, the puncture marks, the GPS coordinates, the photographs, and I still can't believe a wild animal understood honor better than I did for 68 years. How do you live with that?" Before I left, Diego showed me his GPS unit. The rescue coordinates are still saved, still labeled Aini. He says he'll never delete them. That clearing is sacred ground now, the place where a jaguar taught him what his grandfather tried to explain when he was 7, balance, life for life, debt and payment, and the crushing beauty of realizing you're not the most conscious being in the room. I've been writing about animal behavior for 15 years. I've documented tool use in crows, empathy in elephants, language in dolphins. But Diego's story, what Phantasma did, this exists in a different category. This is an animal demonstrating moral reasoning across species boundaries. This is recognition, memory, calculated reciprocity, rescue behavior, and communication all directed at a creature that hunted its kind for decades. This should not be possible according to our models of animal cognition, but Mateo has the puncture marks in his shirt. Diego has the GPS coordinates. And somewhere in the Peruvian Amazon, a jaguar with a broken star on its shoulder returns to a clearing to honor a contract written in a language older than words. We share this planet with minds we've barely begun to understand, and sometimes, rarely, impossibly, they teach us what we've forgotten about being alive. If you believe animals understand more than we give them credit for, write, "They remember everything" in the comments. If you've witnessed something that changed how you see wildlife, share your story below. These moments need to be told.